Hi, everybody. It's our fireside chat, no fire, one hopes. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm going to introduce you, which is completely unnecessary, but I'm going to do it anyway. Say hi to Steve Kerr. Bulls fans and Warriors fans and everybody fans. Head coach of the Golden State Warriors. It's a basketball team. Steve played 15 seasons in the NBA, known as one of the most accurate three-point shooters in history. This is if you're even a passing sports fan, the following is staggering. 9-time NBA champion, 5 times as a player, 3 with the Bulls, 2 with the Spurs, and 4 as a coach of the Warriors. The NBA named you one of the 15 greatest coaches in history. Not bad, but you're not even done, so it may be premature. You just signed on for another couple of years with Golden State, and this summer heading to Paris to be the coach of Team USA, the men's national team. Awesome. Thank you for being here. We're so happy to have you here. We literally haven't said anything yet, but they're clapping already. It's pretty cool. I want to start when some guy like me reads off that resume. It sounds inevitable, like this inevitable march to greatness, like very linear. Not at all linear. It never is for anybody. It really wasn't for you. And you've been hanging out with us for the morning, and so in this room is our team. And our team, we talk about our firm. We talk about we invest. We have this much capital, blah blah blah. But it's the minds and importantly the hearts of everybody in this room that's really the business. And so we're very long making sure that we can evaluate talent. And I'd love you to talk about, take a bunch of steps back, whether from high school to college or from college to the pros. Not at all inevitable that you'd be doing any of those steps. And what was that like, and what did they miss?
Oh, well, yeah, I guess I could tell you that I finished my senior year of high school without a scholarship offer. And so if I had thought then, that somehow I would be part of 9 championships teams in the NBA, I would have thought you were nuts. I think what I've learned over time, both as a player and as a coach, people develop at different rates. There are different opportunities. Some people are luckier than others. You land in a certain situation. There's all kinds of luck and good fortune that goes into life. But we misevaluate talent constantly in the NBA. I recently heard that half of the players in the NFL are undrafted, half of them, which is shocking. So yeah, I think when you're young, you feel like, oh my gosh, I got to be noticed, and I got to look at all these amazing people out there. How can I ever do that? And then you get older and you realize there's so many different pathways to get there, but it does require preparation. It does require some luck, but it requires, I think, a willingness to work and to communicate and to learn and to never stop that process.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I remarked on as I was thinking about your path is you're finishing your time at Arizona. I think in your last year, you guys were in the Final Four. I mean, pretty successful. And you didn't know if you were going to be you weren't even thinking about like an NBA career necessarily. And then you're like, all right, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to hang on for a year or two. We'll see. What I guess talking about like managing your own career and working it, like you realized the things that got you to that point weren't going to keep you there, I think. So what was that realization process? Like, for example, working on your shot. Like you're a pretty good shooter, but I think you like deconstructed your shot in like your first or second season. What was that all about?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I never really thought about playing in the NBA. I thought about playing in college. I grew up, my dad was a professor at UCLA, so I grew up going to Pauley Pavilion when UCLA was right in that heyday of winning national championships year after year after year. So I walked into Pauley Pavilion probably 1972. Bill Walton was playing for UCLA. I walked in there and I immediately thought, this is where I want to, like, it was incredible. The colors, the sights, the band, the emotion of the crowd, it just grabbed me instantly. And so I just loved sports. Back then, we played every sport. It's not like now where you specialize 12 straight months, which another topic I think is terribly unhealthy. But back then, you just played whatever sport. So I played everything, and I loved sports, and I never really thought about what I want to do for a living. I just did stuff that I enjoyed.
And when you got to the NBA and you were like, this isn't work, like, what did you do? Like, what, like,
Yeah, I mean, so starting in like maybe my sophomore, junior year in high school, I really started to focus on basketball. So I worked hard at it, wanting to play college basketball. Eventually, at the last second, got a scholarship to Arizona. And once I got there, I had the coaching and the training and the facilities to really put a lot of work into it. And as I got more and more successful, it became, an obsession. And I just thought, well, I'll coach. I mean, I'm going to stay in basketball. I didn't think I would play in the NBA. So I just thought, this is what I want to do. I love the game. I love being on a team. And I just figured I'd coach, but I kept working, to play and to get better. And it's kind of worked out.
Yeah, kind of. Your coach in college, Lute Olson, legendary Lute Olson, said that you were like, he knew you were a smart player. You were
that's code for slow. If they say you're smart, that just means you're slow.
Is that true?
Yeah, pretty much true.
But he didn't see anything else in you.
What's that?
He didn't see any. But what was he like?
No, he saw that I could shoot, and this was pre-analytics days.
Yeah.
But coaches still understood that the ball has to go through the hoop. They just didn't understand the value of the 2-point shot versus the three, but they did recognize that it had to go in. And so I could really shoot, but I had a lot of other areas of my game that I had to develop in order to survive out there.
Okay. I'm interested, like, now you're in the league, let's call it like 4 or 5 years. You started with the Suns. You went to the Cavaliers, then you're at the Heat. It's 92-ish, if I got that right, or 93. And Chicago Bulls had just won the championship, and you're sitting in Miami or wherever you're sitting thinking, I actually think that's the team that I should be on. Can you walk us through your thinking? Like, this is like higher level, like, personal strategic thinking. Like, what was it all about?
Well, it was kind of a technical thing, but I watched the Bulls play. They had a guy named John Paxson, so your older basketball fans will remember well. And they ran this offense that nobody else ran. It was called the triangle offense. And I watched from afar, and I thought, I could be John Paxson. Like, that's the guy that I could emulate. Similar skill set, similar size. He was a much better player than I was. But he was somebody I thought, that's where my skill would really fit. And it just so happened that he was retiring that year, and the Bulls were looking for somebody to play that role. So I went there and I basically tried out for I didn't have any guarantee at all. It was just a tryout, and I made it, and it was a perfect fit. And that stint in Chicago changed my entire life, really.
You talk about that?
Talk about
how it changed your life. I mean, I have an idea.
Well, I flourished as a player because of the things I talked about. I fit right in to their style. And then Michael Jordan decided to come back. This was when I went there, he was playing baseball. He had left and retired. When he came back, that's when my life changed, because we won 3 championships in a row as a result of his return, and being along for that ride, just like being along for this ride with the Warriors, being along for the ride with the Spurs. When you win, people notice, and you meet people, and things happen, and the ball starts rolling, literally. And until that point with Chicago, I was just kind of trying to survive and hang on to a career for as long as I could, and then that's when everything changed. When I was part of championship teams. I know
everybody asks you to tell this story, but you got to. It's 97. the last shot in Game 7 against Utah, and I want to ask you a larger point about that. But for the person who's been under a rock and doesn't know that story, can you just tell that? I actually don't. Maybe people don't know that story, but it's an incredible story about being in the huddle, deciding what's going to happen on the last play of the season.
Well, it was Game 6, not Game 7.
Okay,
if it was Game 7, I don't know if I would have had the guts to take the.
It's big of you to admit that.
Yeah. Well, we were playing Utah, and earlier in the series, in a similar situation, John Stockton, who was guarding me, had gone over and double teamed Michael Jordan and stolen the ball, and they beat us. This was, I think, Game 3 or something. And so, similar situation, tie score with about 20 seconds left, and we had a timeout, and the cameras actually captured it, and they were kind of in the huddle basically, and Michael turned to me and said, "Be ready, Stockton's going to come, double team." And so I put on a brave face, and I said, "Oh, I'll be ready," and like, please go in, please go in. But no, it's the moment every kid dreams of. And I mean, I literally had that moment in my driveway 1,000 times. You count it down, game-winning shot, you play it out in your head, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you shoot. If you miss in your driveway, you pretend you got fouled, and you have 2 free throws to then try to win the game. But no, it was, to this day, I mean, it's the most surreal moment because it was literally something that I had played out in my head 1,000 times, but every young basketball player does it. I actually got to live it. So what an incredible moment.
It is incredible. But is it too glib? Like, let me maybe take a step back. At some point before this, you were exploring what I think you've called the mind-body connection and getting out of your own way. And you called yourself an overthinker. Was that part of it? I mean, it had to have been part of this. Can you talk about that? Talk about being Jeff Hornacek in practice. What's that all about?
No, I was always an overthinker, and I think the hardest thing about being an athlete is to combine the mind and body, to integrate your talent into an emotional space where you can just find the best version of yourself without thinking. And it's, the zone people talk about, but how do you get there? And for me, as I climbed the ladder and got into these, higher leverage situations, I was thinking too much early in my career. And so I found a book through a friend of mine called The Inner Game of Tennis. And it's a book. I have 10 copies on my shelf right now in my office. I buy 10 every year and give them away to people. The whole book is about combining the mind and the body. The author is a guy named Tim Galloway. His first chapter, he said, and he was a tennis coach. First chapter, he says, I'm watching a tennis match, and the player who's right in front of me is talking to himself. After every bad shot, he's saying, "You idiot, what are you doing?" And he said, I thought to myself, who's he talking to, right? He said, I realized there's 2 of us. There's the conscious and the subconscious. He calls it self 1 and self 2. And he developed this whole philosophy as a tennis coach of finding ways to combine self 1 and self 2, to integrate them to the point where you can be the best version of yourself. The book was fascinating. And so one of the suggestions it had was take a practice session or a match, tennis match, and pretend you're the best player in the world. Pretend for a second you're not, Joe Smith. You're Bjorn Borg. You're, John McEnroe. You're, Lendl, whoever, Djokovic. And so, I read that. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to practice today, and I'm going to be Jeff Hornacek, who was a all-star version of me in the NBA. Much better, but my size, similar game, but way better. And he played for Utah. He played for Phoenix. I just thought, I'm going to be him for a day. I had by far my best practice of the year. It was like I was killing it out there. And practice ended, and I thought, how pathetic is that? I had to pretend to be somebody else to be the best version of me. It made no sense. But it did in the context of the book and in thinking about, how we get wrapped up in results instead of process. And I've like I said, I've used that book for my whole life now, just to remind myself, you got to get lost in all of this. You've got to give your body and your mind a chance to be free and not be so attached to results, judgment, and criticism.
Especially from yourself.
Especially from yourself.
I had not heard of this book until you agreed to come here. 134 pages. I have it in my bag. It's been blowing my mind for like the last 6 days. It's a really interesting book. Much harder, I would have imagined, to do that even with that book and that guidance in the era of social media. Yeah. Do you think you would have been able to do that?
I don't know. I remember when I was trying out for the Bulls, I was having a great training camp, but non-guaranteed contract, just hoping to make the team, and I'm thinking, I got this. I'm playing great. Had 4 or 5 great days of practice, and at the gas station, I'm like, I think I'll pick up a Chicago Tribune. Read about the Bulls, read about what they're saying, and the author of the story basically wrote, that Kerr is likely to be waived. He probably won't make the roster, and it crushed me. It was like I felt like I lost this confidence and the vibe that I had going.
Yeah,
and I went home and I was like, I don't think I'm going to make it. I was like, because this, some writer said that, right? So from that point on, I said, I'm not reading this stuff anymore. And it was really easy. You just didn't have to buy the Chicago Tribune. So fast forward 30 years, try doing that now.
Forget it.
Right? We're all holding every bit of information in our phones. So I think it's never been harder to be a professional athlete. It's never been harder to be a functioning member of society. As a business leader in this room, we all have to tread so carefully. And we're all human, so we're all subject to human emotions, and we want people to like us. And so it is so brutally difficult today to navigate all of that. But you have to try your best to do it. And like I said, back then, it was like, just don't pick up the paper and don't turn on afternoon talk radio, and you're fine. But today, it requires a lot of discipline.
I think my no email idea is picking up steam. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Actually, I just had a thought. You tell me this is wrong. I read a story about you about when you go to Chicago, you go to Second City, the famous improv, and you like go up on stage and are you practicing mind body? Is that what you're doing? Like, what are you doing?
No, I love Second City. Anybody go to Second City before? Yeah, it's so fun. It's my favorite thing to do in Chicago, and they just there's so much history there, but people are so talented, and the improv stuff that they do, and so it's kind of a checklist. We go to Chicago once a year with the Warriors, and if we have a night off, I take the coaching staff. One year I took some of the players, a couple of them got up on stage, and it's just one of those.
What does that feel? I mean, you're with like professional improv people.
Well,
like,
yeah.
What does that feel like?
They make it pretty easy
okay.
for you. Yeah,
okay.
But it's fun.
That sounds fun. Okay, then you become a coach. I make that sound easy. You actually did an enormous amount of prep, and one of the things you did was you went and spent time with Pete Carroll and the Seahawks, the famous football coach formerly of USC. And what was that like? Why did you do that? What did you learn?
Well, first, it was hard to go there because I hated USC so much. As a UCLA fan growing up, I couldn't stand USC, but I couldn't take my eyes off USC football when Pete Carroll was the coach. It was incredible. It was mesmerizing to watch. It wasn't that they were so good. It was the energy. It was the force. You could feel it coming through the TV. And I knew some of it was Pete's personality, but some of it was just however they built their culture. It was really incredible. So I got in touch with Pete through a mutual friend. He invited me up. I watched 3 days of practice and sat in on the coaches' meetings. And after 3 days, he calls me into his office and He goes, so how are you going to coach your team? This is after I had signed with the Warriors, but before we even had a practice. And I said, you mean like what offense are we going to run? And he goes, no, that stuff doesn't matter. Like that has nothing to do with it. And I'm like, oh, great. I've spent like a year trying to figure out what we're going to do at strategy. And he said, no. He said, let me tell you what I learned. He said, I was an NFL coach for, I think it was 4 years, 2 years with the Patriots, 2 years with the Jets. He said he got fired both places. He said, I didn't learn about coaching until I came to the 49ers and worked as a coordinator, or quarterbacks coach, or a secondary coach, I think. He said, I would go down and talk to Bill Walsh at the end of every day, and I'd just pick his brain. And Bill Walsh taught me what coaching is about. And I said, please go on, And but he explained to me that obviously you have to have talent. I mean, when I got to the Warriors, we were loaded with talent. Andre had, it was there a year. You had a young Steph Curry, you had a young Klay Thompson. We were loaded. So you have to have talent to win. But what Pete taught me was how you build a culture is really through your values and your habits. And so he said, go home and figure out what are your values, your most important values to you. Not Phil Jackson's, not Greg Popovich's, yours. So I came in the next day and I really did some introspective thinking about who I am and my background, my family. I gave it a lot of thought, and I came in with 4 values, and he said those values have to come alive every day. So, for example, one of them was joy. Like, I just feel like joy should be such an essential part of everybody's day, right? It's kind of what we all live for.
Yeah.
He said, well, how are your players going to feel joy in practice, And I had just watched his guys practicing for 3 days. There's music pumping, there's laughter, there's humor. It's clear that that's a value that he shares, and his players were feeling that every single day. So the lesson he taught me was, the way you establish culture is if your values as the leader come alive, and they have to be authentic. You can't make that stuff up. So it was a fascinating experience for me to go up there. I didn't think that's what the lesson was going to be at all. And the lesson was so powerful. And it also reminded me that that's exactly what Phil Jackson had done. It's exactly what Greg Popovich had done, Lute Olson at Arizona. They were all very authentic to themselves, but they were values-driven leaders, and those values came alive every day.
We had a panel yesterday with some investors of ours. I don't know if Dom is still here, but one of our investors just said, in describing us, it's a vibe, it's a feeling, and there's lots of words. By the way, tell people what the 4 are besides joy.
Joy, competition, mindfulness, and compassion. And I was raised in a very academic family. My dad was a professor. My older siblings are PhDs. I was sort of the black sheep of the family. U of A, general studies major, go Wildcats. But I'm kind of in the family business, right?
Yeah.
Coaching is teaching. And I just remember so many moments in my childhood where my dad's colleagues from all over the world. He was a Middle East political scientist, professor, eventually became the president of the American University in Beirut. So there were people from all over the world in our backyard having barbecues my whole childhood. And I just remember the vibe. And those were the values that I associated with my own upbringing. And that's how I, sort of came to be.
That's amazing. You spent a large part of your first 16, 17 years out of the country. You were born in Beirut, if I'm not mistaken.
Born in Beirut, yeah. My dad was born there. His parents, my grandparents, were actually missionaries during World War I. They were in their early 20s. They met there. Imagine being in your early 20s, going to Turkey during the Armenian Holocaust. Over 1 million Armenians were killed in World War I. So they went as relief workers and started an orphanage for Armenian children. This was like 1918, 1919.
Wow.
Early 20s. Can you imagine? I mean, you've got 2 kids. I've got 3. Can you imagine your child comes to you at 22 and says, hey, I want to go over to where this Holocaust is happening. And I mean, so incredible story, but they ended up settling in Beirut, and that's where my dad was born. My mom met him. She was on her junior year abroad, spending her junior year from Occidental College in Beirut. My dad was a student there, and they met. And I was born there. My older two siblings were born there. My dad taught at the university at the time. So we have a long history of roots in Lebanon.
Obviously that has an incredible impact on your outlook and how you think about people and think about interacting with people. How would you boil that down? Is that?
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the best education I ever received. When I got older, my dad took the job at UCLA, but he would take sabbaticals every few years. So we went to Cairo, Egypt for 3 years. We were in France for a year. So I was, teenager living in Cairo and going to school with kids from all over the world. So I didn't understand it at the time, but seeing diversity up close, experiencing people, friends from all walks of life, incredibly powerful. And I think having that background kind of shaped my worldview and shaped the way I see the power of diverse thinking, and collaboration.
Yeah. Okay, so you're in the family business as a coach, and you said something that caught my ear, which was, you're basically doing the same thing as Coach Popovich, Phil Jackson, but if you watch The Last Dance, that locker room, that culture in Chicago seemed like a lot different from the one that you've cultivated. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the authenticity part is so important. You can't be anybody else, and that was another thing. Pete Carroll said to me, "You can't be anybody but yourself. If you try to be Phil Jackson, then your players will see right through it."
Right.
And Phil was so unique. He grew up in South Dakota near an Indian reservation. He had this intense passion for Native American history and spirituality. So that was a part of his coaching style. We would warm up before practice, and when it was time to go upstairs, we would meet every day in this basically a film room. But the room was adorned with Native American art. He would come out on the balcony while we were warming up when it was time for our meeting to start, and he'd bang on a drum. And he referred to us as his tribe, like we were his tribe. And you recognized pretty early on that it was authentic. It was genuine. Like he believed so deeply in the spirit and the authenticity of a tribe and how a tribe functions that we became his tribe. And the first couple of days you're kind of like, is this real? And you realize, yeah, it's real. I can't do that. I don't have any of that in my background. If I tried, it would be insane. So you just, I think every coach, every great coach I've had has been so unique and authentic. Greg Popovich is amazing, and he couldn't be more different from Phil Jackson, but they're, two of the top few coaches in the history of the game.
Also in the top 15, I think.
Yeah, a little higher than I am.
Compassion, I thought, was a very interesting one. I heard you and Pete Carroll did a podcast during the pandemic and after, which is, people should listen to it. It's fantastic. And I loved your guys' conversation with Dave Roberts, the Dodgers manager, and he was talking about, it's a much bigger roster than a basketball team, but baseball is. But the guys who are maybe you're not going to see every day, they're not starters, maybe they're in the bullpen, whatever. He was very focused on them feeling him and seeing him, and they knowing that he understood like what they were going through and what the context is. I think that's part of compassion. I imagine that's important. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think in basketball it's easier than those two sports because we have 15 guys. But I think it's important for me and my staff to know all 15 guys' story because it's a hard job. It's a dream job, but it's a hard job. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're Steph Curry, you're one of the greatest players of all time. That's a pretty high bar to reach every single day. Imagine the pressure on Steph Curry. And if you're the 15th guy, you're just trying to make it. You're trying to pay your bills. You're trying to achieve a life that can change the course of your family's history from a financial standpoint. and everything in between, right? You've got different players every year at different stages of their career. If we don't know their stories, then that's on us because we're coaching them. So we need to know what makes them tick. And I think that's a really important part of any leadership position is really getting to know people. It's not just imparting technical knowledge. It's really getting to know them and care about them, because then that's when the communication really can click and you can get to the juicy part.
The juicy part. I'm supposed to ask a follow-up question on that, but okay. You're like texting your players after a game, especially after a loss. I think I've heard you say. What do you get without divulging state secret? Texting. Yeah. What's that all about?
I just think texting, writing a note, having a conversation. There's a lot of different ways to communicate. Sometimes if you with the younger group, they're gonna pay attention to the text. They might go back and read it versus a conversation. They may forget what you said or not pay attention at all.
Yeah.
So I think part of the job is touching base with players periodically, where it doesn't have to be like, hey, we're going to have a meeting in the principal's office. It's just, hey, how you doing? And I think a text or a note sometimes is a really powerful way to communicate.
Let's talk about you were sitting in the session this morning we did about your organizational system, one's organizational system. And one of the, I think, themes that Alan was mentioning was kind of like, we're not the same people we were 10 years ago. You've been coaching for 10 years, a little more. How have you changed? How has your approach changed? Has it changed? Both as a function of you have different players, but also you have different skills and abilities. Like as we get older, we can do different things, right? Mentally and what we're focused on. How has it changed for you?
I think it's changed in that the league has changed so much. When I came in 10 years ago, we had 6 coaches. Now we have 14, and I'm managing a much bigger group now, and it's that changed everything. The way the game is played now is very different. We saw on the analytics presentation earlier. All that stuff, 10 years ago was just kind of entering the league, and now it's commonplace. Everybody is kind of copying this pattern of layups and threes. And we were at the time 10 years ago, we were the innovators. We were the ones shooting all the threes. Now we're also playing the fastest pace of anybody in the league. And because we were winning, people started copying us. And now we're the ones who are looking up and saying, "Oh, we got some things to catch up on." And some part of my job now is to figure out what those things are.
Yeah.
And so some of that is analytically, some of that is personnel driven, some of it is style. So for me, I am always searching for different ways to play, different styles of offense. I visit other coaches. I'm going to visit some college coaches this summer because I think the college game in some ways is different from the pro game, and I'm looking to maybe zag a little bit, as a lot of people are zigging. I think we got to zag a little bit based on our personnel, and so I need some fresh ideas. I need some new thoughts. So I think this stuff, we're all constantly evolving and learning, and it's important not to just stop that process.
The analytics, like from an amateur's perspective, like mine, like people think about Moneyball. I know you've spoken to Michael Lewis. That's super interesting to you. But is it too baseball's got so much stuff that you can kind of analyze. Basketball, I think, much different. And so, are there limits to that? And are you already hitting the limits of that, or you think there's more sort of analytics besides shot arc or whatever else you guys are looking at?
I think I don't think there are limits. I think things will continue to evolve. I think the hardest part with analytics in sports is the data can be wrong. It's just like your opinion as a coach. I can run a play that I think is is right and it doesn't work, the data sometimes can be misleading. I'll give you an example. When I was in Phoenix as general manager, we had this guy, Amari Stoudemire, who was an amazing player. And from dunking to about 6 feet, he had this little hook shot that was deadly. And he was an incredible finisher. But he was nearing the end of his contract. We were thinking about trading him. So we put our analytics department on this project. And they came up with a list of players who were equally or even more proficient from 0 to 6 feet than Amari Stoudemire. Okay, so every shot from 0 to 6 feet, how good were they? So they came up with this guy. His name was J.J. Hickson. He played in the league for a few years, played in North Carolina State, and he had a much higher percentage from 0 to 6 feet than Amari Stoudemire. And we're sitting there like, there's no way. There's no way this is true. So we pulled up all of this guy's makes from 0 to 6 feet. And you know what we found out? He was fantastic from 0 to 1 feet. But from 1 to 6, he never took a shot. But because he never took a shot, we still counted like from 0 to 6 feet.
Great percentage, yeah.
Great percentage. But he was nowhere near the player Amari Stoudemire. So in that case, the data was wrong. If we had made a decision based on that, we would have gone terribly wrong. So a big part of analytics in sports is figuring out what is actually applicable and then how to apply it. And one thing we've done is we've hired a young guy named Will Sheehy, who, if you're an Indiana Hoosier, you might remember him. 10 years ago, he's All-American at Indiana. Really bright guy and very analytically driven and still great on the court. 30 years old now, still gets out there with our guys and plays. But his mind is very analytically driven, but he also has this basketball background. So now the coaches are much more likely to listen to him rather than to someone who hadn't played at that level. And he's now integrating the numbers with the stuff that we're doing on the floor. And we're able to zero in on the stuff that's not only important, but accurate also, if that makes sense.
You need the human like overlay.
Yes. Because I still think it's, sports are more art than science. And we've evolved because of the scientific part of it. But you're still human beings and it's still people collaborating and working together. But the science part is really important. It's just trying to find that happy medium.
So you're doing your R&D trips when you're not going to be coaching Team USA this summer. I'm thinking next phase for the war. It's super interesting to think about what's next for the Warriors, right? Like, I'm sure everyone's calling the end of an era way too early, but it's got to be a super interesting puzzle for you. So I'd love to hear you talk about how you're thinking about it. You obviously don't know what you're going to conclude yet about what you got to do for next season. I think, but the Warriors were very good second half. Like for the second half this year, you're a good team, like top 10 in offense and defense. Do you try and just get to that earlier? Like, what are you doing? And you've also talked about wanting to make sure that this era ends when it ends with, I think you said honorably, with grace, with dignity. What does that mean? That's a compound question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think what's hard in sports is that inevitably every team, every era is going to fade, right? And that's where we are now. I mean, it's been 10 years since I've been there, really 12 years since the team got really good. And so we had a lot of amazing years in there, but inevitably players get older. Andre's not in the gym anymore. He's here at this conference, right? That hurts our team a little bit, right? And same thing with Steph and Clay and Draymond. They're all on the decline. And it's rare that you just automatically, just reshuffle the deck and come up with a really talented group. It's not going to happen right away. So as the team declines, I've talked to the guys about the importance of, going out the right way. Like you want to do it with dignity. You want to, you don't want to lose the soul of who you are, because if you can maintain your soul, your culture, then the team can continue to thrive, albeit not with the same record, but with the same processes. And as you start to build your team with young talent, hopefully those same values, those same that same vibe that you have in the gym can be there, and it sets up the next run.
That's pretty cool to think about. Okay, Olympics. That's an incredible roster. I mean, ridiculous. But the rest of the world plays pretty well too. Yeah. How are you approaching that? How are you and your staff approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, we have, this is basically like the 92 Dream Team. This is the 24 version of that. I mean, it literally is all the best players. It's LeBron James and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Joel Embiid and Anthony Edwards. I mean, it's the very best
incredible
player. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. One of my first thoughts is I'm going to have to sit 2 or 3 Hall of Famers every game. You know, you can only play 9 or 10. There's 12 guys on the roster. So I've already assigned one of my assistant coaches to be in charge of playing time. So I've figured that one out
Delegation,
quickly.
yeah, that's good.
But no, the real problem is that we are not, I don't know if you remember Charles Barkley in 92, you know, making fun of the Angolan team as they beat him by 70 points. We're not playing, you know, the Angolan team from 92. We're playing amazing teams. You know, Serbia, Canada, Germany, all these teams are loaded with NBA talent and continuity, and the FIBA game is very different from the NBA game. So it will not be easy despite having this loaded roster. It's gonna be fun though.
Sounds fun. No, you didn't divulge any secrets about what we're going to do, but you shouldn't. We gotta, you know, I know this is supposed to be a international group, and it is, but, you know, I don't want you to ruin our chances. Okay. Great teacher in your background?
I'm sorry?
A great teacher in your background? A teacher who you remember, who inspired you, who turned you onto a book, an idea? Anybody?
Honestly, my coaches were my favorite teachers.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think Phil Jackson was probably the best teacher that I had in terms. He would give us books throughout the year. He was an intense reader. He would think about each person and pick a book that related to that person's background.
You remember a book that he gave you?
Oh yeah, he gave me Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses. He knew about my background in Arizona and the Southwest, and but he was a fascinating guy,
yeah.
and remains a mentor to me, and I think the most unique coach, and I think Phil in a lot of ways helped change the culture in coaching to where we are now. This is so healthy, what's happening in sports at every level now. You're getting coaches who are so much more in tune with the connection with the athlete rather than the dominance over the athlete. And it's just so much better for every athlete of every age to feel a connection and to feel inspired rather than feel intimidated. Because growing up, my coaches, you know, they came from a different era where you were supposed to be, you know, afraid of
authority figure. Yeah. You know, we have this saying here about being. We try to be nice winners. I feel like that's you. Like you're like, and everybody in the NBA says you're the nicest guy in the NBA. But they don't mean you're a push. I mean, you're a pretty passionate guy. Like you've got some good stories in your professional background. Like you don't back down. How do you do both?
Yeah, I think I was as a kid. I had the worst temper. You know, when I would lose, I would cry and throw stuff, and it was really hard to manage that and learn how to temper it. I finally did when I was 47. That's when I realized I can actually be a good sport. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think I had to have some success, you know, before I could actually realize that it's okay to lose sometimes. You know, when you're young and you're fiery and you're insecure, like I was, you know, everything just seems like you're fighting for everything. And I think I got to a place in my professional life where I had some success and was able to feel confident in that, and confident enough to recognize the reality of life, which is that we're all going to go through wins and losses and ups and downs. But it was a hard grind. One of the reasons I picked up that book, Inner Game of Tennis, is because I beat myself to death as a player. I was so hard on myself, and it was unhealthy. And so it took time, and it took me to have some success to maybe temper my emotions a little bit.
There's a million things to talk about. I think compassion, competitiveness, mindfulness, joy. What an incredible, we got to think about if we're doing that, if we're integrating that. But I think all I'll say is this is incredible. You're incredible. Good luck in Paris. Thank you so much for being here. This is awesome. So thanks, Steve.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.